To start off our list, we have at number 8 the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, put into effect by President Eisenhower. This 42,000-mile complexion of interstate highways linked all of the major cities together. The U.S. highway system served as a model for other nations as well. Although President Eisenhower's intent was for easier mobilization of troops and supplies for national defense, it created jobs and evolved the auto industry. The Highway Act accelerated the growth of suburbs and contributed to a more homogeneous national culture.
And therein lies the challenge, building highways and roads and streets fast enough to keep up with the need.
Coming at number 7 in the top moments in American history is the coordinated attacks on the United States of September 11, 2001, better known as 9/11. For some context, this attack was led by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden. These were coordinated attacks targeting the Twin Towers in New York City and the Pentagon by commercial airplanes that were hijacked by Al-Qaeda. Over 3,000 were killed during the attack, including 400 police officers and firefighters. At the end of the day, President George W. Bush gave a speech to the American public from the Oval Office where he said,
"Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America."
From that day, the war on terror had begun, where the United States began to make an effort to overthrow the Taliban regime. Though the war on terror still continues, it was not until May of 2011 that the infamous Osama bin Laden was killed. This makes our chart as a top moment in U.S. history because in the present day, the American public still lives at a point where we are constantly fighting against terror and foreign policy at home.
This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace.
Next up is number 6, the Louisiana Purchase. This act expanded the powers of the federal government and nearly tripled the size of the United States. The country now spanning from the Pacific Ocean to about modern-day Colorado, the Louisiana Territory added a large cutoff of North America to the United States that makes up most of the country as we know it today. This was due to the President Thomas Jefferson negotiating with Napoleon over the price of the land, which was a measly $15 million. Despite seeming like a lot of money, it was a steal considering how much land they were getting. This also marked the beginning of the trend of manifest destiny as it gave America more land to be explored, and this set a precedent for the further exploration into the American territory.
Up next is number 5, the passing of the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was a massive turning point in African American history as it marked the complete constitutional abolition of slavery. Efforts made prior to this inspired such action but did not leave a lasting impact of national abolition. For example, the Emancipation Proclamation, written by Abraham Lincoln, marked a spark for the creation of the 13th Amendment, but even though it had the same principles as the 13th Amendment, it was not as effective in completely eradicating slavery from the United States, especially in the South. The 13th Amendment also acted as a stepping stone, leading to further civil rights measures taken in the future, such as the Progressive Era and the Civil Rights Movement that completely fought for complete equality to white Americans. Additionally, the 13th Amendment changed the very foundation of the country, as the Southern economy became delac as the slave labor was destroyed, and the practice and commonplace prior to the Civil War was completely eradicated from United States society. Overall, the 13th Amendment acted as the very beginning of reform for generations to come. Coming in close to number 5, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act truly started the beginning of a fight for true equal rights of African Americans to white Americans. The Civil Rights Act protected African Americans from discrimination in public areas, and this was huge for the furtherment of respect towards them. This also marks a time of a nationwide ultimatum of many measures by the black populace to get an actual piece of legislation passed that protects the civil rights under federal law. For example, the March on Washington led by Martin Luther King Jr. fought for the popular opinion of legislation to be passed in favor of the civil rights movement, and the Civil Rights Act was a massive topic on the minds of protesters at that protest. Also following the Civil Rights Act, further legislation was passed that continued and furthered the rights of African Americans, such as the Voting Rights Act, which gave African Americans less discrimination in voting and more opportunities to be politically active.
Up comes number 3, a keystone of our claim to democracy. This marked the beginning of our independence. In response to the Intolerable Acts, the U.S. decided to declare independence from Britain. This declaration was drafted in 1766 in Philadelphia by our founding fathers, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and the ever-famous Alexander Hamilton. This document is revered throughout the U.S. and is considered a bold statement against tyranny and in support of our independence, earning its number 3 spot.
Coming in at number 2 in the top moments in American history is the atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. Again, for some context, the Allies had just completed the war in Europe, but the United States and the rest of the Allies had to continue to fight in the Pacific. With the Japanese army continuing to fight on, the United States had begun coordinating the Manhattan Project. This project primarily focused on the production of 2 atomic bombs. On August 6th and August 9th, the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki respectively. This comes in our list of the top moments in American history because they are the bombs that directly correlated with the start of the Cold War. This continuity of the problems with atomic bombs still remain today, as more and more countries are developing and expanding their creation of atomic weapons. The tension with Russia still arises in the United States government, which basically began with the development of atomic bombs through the Manhattan Project.
For the top moment in United States history, we have the signing of the U.S. Constitution. The previous Constitution created, called the Articles of Confederation, failed to provide a solid foundation for the new independent nation. It had plenty of problems, including issues on commerce and state representation. The Founding Fathers would host a constitutional convention that would draft and ratify a new federal constitution. The American Constitution would contain contracts that define the powers of the government and represent fundamental law. Also, there was an addition of amendments that would protect individuals' rights from the abuses of the federal or central government. The U.S. Constitution was created to rest on the idea of republicanism, where the sovereignty of states would rest on the people. This document will also establish a system of checks and balances due to the addition of the judicial and executive branch. This important document in United States history is still in effect since March 4, 1789, and proves to be the foundation of American democracy and liberty.